in my own research, going back to the feminist question helped me shape a bit what my own research program would be about. So, you know, for a long time I did single cell injections of neurons in the visual system and then in Alzheimer's disease. And then I had to leave science for various reasons to go into, or like close my lab, to do, and I ended up doing science administration for 6 years. And so when I had the opportunity to come back to academia, I thought I want to have a research program that would be empirical but commensurate with feminist epistemologies. So I thought, well, what are those? So I kind of went back to the literature on feminist epistemology, and I have one of the papers I sent you on situated neuroscience kind of deals with that. And of course I picked and chose, right, what would be reasonable if you were doing empirical psychology and empirical neuroscience. And so I thought, well, based on what Helen Longino thinks about, I would want it to be about what's important to the people I'm studying. I would want the methods to match the problem and not just apply methods I knew to the next problem. I would want, according to Nancy Tuana, to be about discovering ignorance. And I don't know that anybody really covered this, but it really came to me through the work of Elizabeth Gross. I would want it to be about the whole body in context. I didn't want the brain to be the CEO of the body. And I thought that was actually really easy to do if you were studying hormones, because hormones unite every single body system. So that's kind of how I was influenced by feminist theory. I definitely picked and chose, but that's kind of how I came up with the questions that I've come up with to study in the last 7 years. And they're really about the whole body in context, about if you cut one part of the body, how does the entire body become involved through the nervous system. And I say to people, well, if I studied the immune system, I could think about it that way, because the immune system also unites all different body parts. Mm-hmm. And ultimately getting a bigger picture of women's bodies in general and their response to treatments, conditions, and hormones.
I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the significance that sex and gender plays in studying the nervous system specifically.
Yeah, well, so actually one of the fields that has done the most to put forward the idea of sex differences, it's sort of emerged into sex differences, if you will, is the field of hormones and behavior. It's a beautifully coherent research field in psychology, and it started off trying to understand the influence of, first of all, hormones on behavior, and then kind of morphed into understanding how, well, if there's differentiation of the genitalia and the reproductive system, if this differentiation takes place through hormones, that must affect the brain too, that the brain is linked with behavior. So then they started looking in the brain to see if there were hormonal influences on the brain, and of course they were interested in the binary between males and females, and so they were looking for hormonal influences on the female brain and hormonal influences on the male brain, and how those hormonal differences could shift, in a sense, to change the female norm to male and the male norm to female. But it really was about a binary, even though if you look at the individual experiments, I look at the experiments, sort of foundational experiments, as my book, Sex in the Brain, and part you can see how some of the foundational experiments actually weeded out animals that didn't behave according to the binary, because they were really interested in reinforcing dimorphisms. And now that has really morphed into sex differences in neuroscience. And now that field that area, and of course that's become very rich with respect to funding agencies requiring that scientists begin to include both male and female animals in their studies, that they include male and female humans in clinical studies, and that in some cases they begin to incorporate gender. That field has been a driver for these kinds of incorporations of sex differences and gender differences into funding mandates, calls for applications, and review. But again, it's been very focused on the binary. And I've had some colleagues refer to gender as the G word. So as I said, I'm trying to organize this symposium at a very sex differences focused organization, the Organization for the Study of Sex Differences, but I'm saying we need to also include gender in animal models, and let's actually think about what that would be in animal models. Maybe it means taking gender identification off the table, but maybe it means including power structures, housing, interactions between males and females, or females and females, into the model. If you're studying cardiovascular disease, I'm sure everyday insults and stigma make a difference in how cardiovascular disease plays out. Don't you want that in your animal model for testing a drug treatment?
Mm-hmm.
It could really be important for the reproducibility of results and the rigor of your findings. So we're going to give it a try, and it'll be a first, attempt. But we have to get people to think about it. And so I think it's exciting. It's opening up. It's innovation. It's a way to get new ideas.
Mm-hmm.